Okay, so tonight I was scouting around for something to talk about, and I kind of realised I'd not really, or we'd not really spoken about the Golden Dawn. And in many ways, I think it's a key occult society, quite an important one for many, many reasons, which we'll go into a moment. And it, it was all part of this revival of interest in spirituality in the sort of 1900s. So we'll talk about that. And of course, at the end of it, I'm sure there's some people with more knowledge about the Golden Dawn than myself, and we can actually then have a chat about it. But hopefully, this introduction will serve as a starting point for us. So, the Golden Dawn, founded in 1888 or thereabouts, by three Freemasons, a guy called William Westcott, a guy called William Robert Woodman, and Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers, who will be familiar to anybody who's read any kind of occult literature. He was quite an influential writer. All of them were involved with various esoteric, mystical, magical societies prior to the founding of the Golden Dawn. So they were all Freemasons of a very high degree, and they were also Rosicrucians, which has got a big bearing to the story. And if you want to look back at the Moot on Rosicrucians, it's up there to look at for those of your members. And the idea was that they wanted to create a fraternity that foregrounded ceremonial magic and the study of mysteries, as well as Hermetic tradition. And the story of how the Golden Dawn was formed, I think, is a fascinating story, as we'll delve into now. So William Wynne Westcott, a really smart guy, born 1848, he was actually a doctor of medicine and a crown coroner. So we're talking about people that were, high up in society, and again, as Freemasons, they will have been quite influential in their circles. He was also a member of the Rosicrucians, and he was really one of the founder members of the Golden Dawn. The other guy, Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers, he was a polyglot. He was a smart guy, really, in terms of his languages. And he was actually involved in the translation of a number of well-known mystical texts, including the Lesser and Greater Key of Solomon, the Magic of Abramelin the Mage, as well as all kinds of related grimoire. So he was quite up on his esoteric and occult knowledge. He was a Rosicrucian, that's where he met Westcott, and in 1891 became the leader of the Golden Dawn after the death of Woodman. So quite an important character, and as we're going to see, a character that maybe brought the Golden Dawn into disrepute in a certain set of situations. And then the other one, William Robert Woodman, again, he was a medical doctor, he was a police surgeon. He was a supreme magus within the Rosicrucians, and he's the least known member of the Golden Dawn. There's not a tremendous amount known about him, and he actually died before the Golden Dawn was fully established, which is why he was sidelined. But these three guys set out to create a magical society which would teach people sort of areas of occult practice and mysticism, heavily influenced by Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. Now, this is where it gets interesting, and this would make a great film if it's not already been done. These three guys claimed that they had a mandate to form this esoteric order from something called the cipher manuscripts. And I think if you gave this sort of outline of a plot to somebody like Dan Brown, who wrote Angels and Demons and Da Vinci Code, you can have a field day with this stuff. But the cipher manuscripts were the secret documents or folios that came into the possession of one of those three guys before the Golden Dawn set up. So we'll look at those a little bit. It is suggested in various myths about the Golden Dawn that William Westcott received the cipher from a Reverend Woodford, who was a colleague and also the noted Masonic scholar Kenneth Mackenzie, around 1868. Now, they were written in a cipher script, as you can see an example of there, which needed decoding, and Westcott decoded them in around about 1878. The ciphers, which were a folio of 60 to 80 volumes of paper, contained outlines of a series of graded rituals and basically a syllabus for an instruction in esoteric thinking. The Kabbalah, Hermetic magic, astrology, tarot, geomancy, and alchemy were all part of this syllabus. Now, we need to remember, and we found in earlier moots, a guy called Cornelius Agrippa produced his 3 books of occult wisdom sometime before this, and the syllabus is drawn largely from what appeared in Cornelius Agrippa's work. The ciphers also contain diagrams of crude drawings of various ritual implements and even costumes, and they became the original material upon which the Golden Dawn was actually based, or so the legend tells you. The thing is that these cipher teachings are really a summary of previously known magical traditions, like the tarot, like geomancy, like the Kabbalah. So there was nothing brand new in the cipher. And I say 60 folios containing structure outline of a magical initiation rituals, and bringing into focus the importance of understanding the elements, the classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water. And we'll talk about that in a moment later. And it apparently offered this graded syllabus so people could be initiated and travel up the grades, very similar to the grading we find in Freemasonry and the grading we find in Oddfellows, as well as in Rosicrucians. And the problem with the cipher and these documents, which you can actually go and find, they're in various libraries. The Freemasons also have copies of some of this stuff. The problem with it is because there's nothing overly original, it all might be a little bit of a hoax or a fraud, or at least some creative thinking on the part of the 3 gentlemen concerned. In the cipher, encoded, was the name and address of a lady apparently called Anna Sprengel. She was apparently a countess and lived near Nuremberg. And through the name and address that was decoded by Westcott, he said he was put in contact with her and entered several years of voluminous, that's a great word, correspondence. She said, or Westcott said that she said, that there was a Golden Dawn established in that area in Nuremberg around 1886. And this lady, Anna Sprengel, was supposed to have given Mathers and the others a charter authorizing him and the others to found lodges of the Golden Dawn in Britain. So the cipher not only presented this curriculum, but also put them in touch with this Anna Sprengel, who gave them the sufficient initiations to make them Grand Masters of lodges in England and beyond. I know when I first came across this story about the Golden Dawn years and years ago, there were little alarm bells going off about what this was really all about. However, based upon the permissions given by this lady called Sprengel, they set up the Isis Urania charters, which were the first temples of the Golden Dawn. And the Sprengel letters gave grades of exempt adept to Westcott, Mathers and Woodman, as well as a charter to establish those other temples. And the 5 grades that were required to bring people up from initiation to a certain level within the order. What was interesting about the Isis Urania Charter, and indeed the beginning of the Golden Dawn, irrespective of what the cipher manuscript was about, is that it specifically enabled women not just join, to be encouraged to join. And the order was said to represent a group that was perfect equality between men. And that was in contrast to the Rosicrucians at the time, and certainly to Masonry. So the fact that they encouraged women into the order made it very different. And as we're going to see, some very influential women became involved. This really was a movement towards, it was a feminist movement in many respects, and many feminists at the time will have, of a spiritual inclination, will have been drawn to the Golden Dawn. Interestingly, the charter, which was offered by Anna Sprengel, was signed only by Westcott Mathers and William Robert Woodman. So again, that cements them as the founders of the Golden Dawn, and in particular this particular chapter. Now, there are serious questions about the authenticity of the cipher. Copies of the cipher that have sort of been around actually have references to the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And that wasn't deciphered until 1822 and not published until 1842. So some of the claims of much earlier forms of the Golden Dawn predating this are brought into question. And there's been no evidence of Anna Sprengel or her lodge, which leads us to a suggestion that maybe these 3 guys, in particular Westcott, invented her for a purpose. There's no German order of the Golden Dawn Temple, and no evidence that it was part of a secret group of the Rosicrucians and part of a secret group called the Society of 8. There's no direct evidence of that. And the symbolism contained in the cipher is not very different from that of high-degree Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. Remember, those 3 guys were Rosicrucians and Freemasons. Some uncharitable people have said that these 3 guys just made the whole thing up and invented Anna Sprengel because they needed a validation for their the origins of their society and their teaching, which is an odd thing, really, because that material had been around anyway. Why would they need validation? However, they come from a structured set of societies that have initiation procedures and have levels and degrees, and so maybe they felt they needed a cipher, a code, a special dispensation to give them permission to set up the Golden Dawn, rather than saying, "Hey guys, we just made this up," or "Hey guys and girls, we just made this up." There are letters by a guy called Mackenzie that said the Society of 8 actually existed, but nothing describes what they actually taught or practiced, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Because the manuscripts of the society were questioned, it later caused major problems for the Golden Dawn. And in fact, some Golden Dawn members later on started to question the authenticity of the charter that the three guys had been given, and that caused certain people to fall out with other people, and particularly Gregor Mathers, who was ousted from his position. More of that later. Apparently, though, there really was, and that makes sense, a German Rosicrucian order, sometimes referred to the Golden and Rosenkreuz, and it did have a branch in London. And if you remember, when we looked at the Rosicrucian in a Moot not so long ago, we got a sense of their origins and where they were coming from, the fact that they were a mystical order that was across Europe, if not further. It is suggested that this German order of Rosicrucians, well, Mackenzie was a member of it in 1810, and he was the guy that actually gave this folio of work to be translated. So the question kind of remains: did Woodford find the cipher manuscript in a second-hand bookstall, as he claimed, on Wellington Road in London, and gave it to Westcott to decode? Or did Westcott Mathers create the manuscripts and letters themselves and created the origin myth of the Rosicrucian adepts to give credibility to their order? If you study this, you'll make come up with your own decision. I, at the moment, tend to think it's the latter. That the cipher manuscripts were created in order to give license to these three guys to set up the Golden Dawn. Don't sue me on that. I'm going to change my mind. One of the great things about the Golden Dawn was in its structure, in its early structures, it actually allowed or invited and insisted on women joining. One of the first members of the Golden Dawn as a woman was Mona Bergson, who was the daughter of the philosopher Bergson, but was actually married to MacGregor Mathers. And she claimed to be a psychic channel. That's her on the picture there. But Maud Gone was a feminist suffragette activist. Annie Horniman was a theatrical producer and actually related to the Horniman Teas. Florence Farr was an actress, and she was brought in by Annie Horniman. Constance Wilde was the wife of Oscar Wilde, and a lady called Pamela Coleman Smith, sometimes known as Poppy. She was an artist that collaborated with A.E. Waite on the Rider Smith Tarot. On the Waite Smith Tarot, published by Rider. So these kind of high-flying women were welcomed in as members of the Golden Dawn and added so much to it in terms of how some of the rituals developed. The theatrical sensibilities of Annie Horniman and Florence Farr really allowed for rituals that were very theatrical to be produced and written, become part of the magical practice of the order. Other notable members of the Golden Dawn at the time, well, you can see a list there. William Butler Yeats, the poet, quite a serious occultist in his own right, and wrote widely on the Golden Dawn. William Butler Yeats also was an exponent of automatic writing. Yeah, Bram Stoker, Dracula guy, Aleister Crowley, Arnold Bennett, the playwright, Israel Regardie, Dion Fortune, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, were all members of the Golden Dawn at some level, which tends to remind me that what we're looking at here is the upper echelons of society joining a fashionable club. Remember, at the time, there was this spiritual revival in the sense that people were looking for other ways of expressing their spirituality. So around this time, we see the birth of spiritualism, we see the birth of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, to name but a few. And of course, we do see a resurgence in interest of the ancient esoteric occult teachings, or the older esoteric occult teachings. Certainly, discoveries in Egypt would have fueled that particular interest. And so it was a melting pot of spiritual organizations. Freemasonry had been around a long time. Some may have argued that it had lost its mystical roots and become just a gentleman's society. Certainly Rosicrucianism, which, as we've already discovered, maintained a curriculum of teaching esoteric knowledge, was around and possible. And the Golden Dawn really was another version of these clubs. Where it was successful, however, it actually meant that the membership and the followers grew quite substantially in the first 70 odd years of its existence. So if we try to put all this in a timeline, the Society of Eight I've already mentioned was founded in 1883 by Frederick Holland, and they were based on the documents written by Kenneth Mackenzie. The Freemasonry archive actually identifies Kenneth Mackenzie as the author of the cipher documents, or shall we say the creator of the cipher documents. In 1871, Sat Bahai was based on Hindu terminology and founded by J. at Lawrence. I think actually that's 1883 date is wrong. I think it should be 1871, I think. I need to change that. In 1875, Mackenzie joined the Baha'i movement, which wasn't Baha'i, but it was Hindu mysticism. And Lawrence and Mackenzie, of course, are linked to the cipher documents. Westcott acquired those papers after Mackenzie's death. In 1886, the cipher documents were given to Woodford. Question mark, were they given to him or did they sit down and write them? In 1887, Wynne Westcott decoded the cipher documents and claims he started correspondence with Sprengel. In 1888, permission was apparently given by Sprengel to form a UK Golden Dawn temple, and Ursus Urania Temple was founded in London, and Westcott, Mathers, and Woodman were given honorary grades of Adeptus Exemptus, very high grades. This timeline is fascinating in the sense that if we dismiss the existence of Anna Sprengel, there is a direct link between the Society of Eight, which was actually an inner group within Freemasonry or Rosicrucianism, an inner group, a secret group within those organizations. By 1888, an Osiris temple was founded in Weston-super-Mare, so moved from London to Weston-super-Mare. Also in 1888, a Horus temple was founded in Bradford, all Golden Dawn. In 1892, Mathers claimed it was established with the secret chiefs, a link with the secret chiefs, and received rituals for a second order. Now, one of the core ideas within this occult society was that there were a series of sort of sacred chiefs or hidden masters, and it's never made clear who or what they were. The implication is that they were spiritual chiefs working on a spiritual realm, similar to Blavatsky's Theosophy and the Ascended Masters stuff. Now, again, if the cipher manuscripts were created, what's to say that the rituals for the second order were also not created? Whichever way you want to flow with that, by 1893, the second order of the temple had become active under the name of the Ordo Rose Rubae of Ura. Oh well, can't pronounce that. The Order of the Rose Cross, the Red Rose and the Golden Cross. You would know that the cross and the rose feature within Rosicrucianism. By 1893, an Amun-Ra temple was founded in Edinburgh, and by 1893, Mathers established the Hathor temple in Paris. So this organization was growing. Okay, it had caught the imagination, probably the more well-to-do, more affluent, and more, well, in some cases, the more avant-garde people, and it had grown. And this is where things start to fall apart for them, because as the Golden Dawn reached its maximum extent, people began to ask questions about the foundation of the order itself. In particular, Spengler, in particular, the sacred chiefs, and why was it that only the upper echelons of the Golden Dawn could intercede with the sacred chiefs? Why was it that the general membership weren't taught how to make these connections, and so on? In fact, one of the problems with the Golden Dawn, and which led to its downfall, was its very strict hierarchical structure. Nothing new there in terms of many occult esoteric societies, but it was the way that once people question the foundation of the right to rule, then the right to rule can be taken away. Okay. So in the twilight years of the Golden Dawn, we see lots of things happening. Apparently, between 1896 and 1897, Westcott lost some papers of rituals of the Golden Dawn, which brought his employer's attention. And it is suggested that he resigned because of that. It is probably likely that he wasn't just resigning. He realized that the path the Golden Dawn was on wasn't what he had hoped it would be. In his absence, Florence Farr was appointed chief adept, and Mathers, by this stage, was the only active founding member. So those have fallen away. By 1899, adepts of the Ursula Temple and the Amun-Ra temples became dissatisfied with Mathers' leadership. They had started to ask questions, which, if you think about it, spiritual enlightenment is all about asking questions. And because of the questions that were being asked, Mather decided to come away from it. He rarely attended. Yeah. Florence Farr, on the other hand, had established something called the Sphere, which was in a secret society within the Ursula Urania group. As you can see, that what's happening here is the whole organization is fragmenting and fracturing because of some serious questions about philosophy and right to lead, I guess. 1900 was interesting because Aleister Crowley had been member of the Golden Dawn. Now, Aleister Crowley, I think, is a fascinating character. You either like him or you loathe him. He's a bit like Marmite. I think Crowley was a very smart cookie, very bright cookie. Maybe that led him to be a bit egotistical, but you can't underestimate the power and importance of Crowley's work. Yeah. But when he applied to have his initiation to Adeptus Minor with the London group where he was, they refused him because some people didn't like Crowley, which was a little bit odd, really, because Crowley was quite an important character in some of the Golden Dawn lore. And knowing Crowley having been rejected like that, you have a sense that, well, in fact, he did start to publish a lot of the Golden Dawn's material and set up his own particular group. However, before he did that, he went across to Mathers in Paris, and Mathers actually initiated him into that higher order against the London temples. So the London temples decided they were going to expel one of the founders, Mathers, from the order. This is it's politics, isn't it? That's what we're looking at here. Is we see this in political parties. In 1901, Yeats wrote a private paper at the State of Affairs and declared independence, and that whole temple declared independence. But Yeats then left that temple. So now there was a battle between temples, okay, and not just between Mather's leadership and the origin of the mandates to form temples, but between some very important doctrine between the temples. So A.E. Waite, the guy of the tarot fame, tried to retain the temples, and an independent temple known as Stella Matutina was formed, which Yeats joined and was a member until 1921, and then he left it all behind. I think the backbiting and the kind of vitriol had got too much for him. In 1913, Mathers realised that, well, either realised the game was up, or that he couldn't hold on to the London temples. However, the Weston-super-Mare Temple and the Bradford temples remained royal, and these branches were renamed Alpha et Omega. At this time, Mathers was also accused by one of the leaders of the London temples, and that actually much of the Golden Dawn's work was satanic, and that was her basis for leaving the temple and denouncing all of its works. By 1930s, most branches of Alpha Omega were closed. Two Stella Matuna temples remained, one in Bristol until 1970, the other one in New Zealand until 1978. To all intents and purposes, the backbiting, the falling out with each other was the end of the Golden Dawn. Crowley, as you know, would have left, and he founded the AA, not Alcoholics Anonymous, but an occult society through which he published a lot of his teachings, and started to take esoteric membership and clubs into societies in a different way, with the publication of the Law of Thelema, which was Crowley's particular take. So, as in terms of the Golden Dawn today, well, there are multiple groups that follow hybrid elements of Golden Dawn. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Inc., is American. And actually, I joined that for a while and to see what was going on. And they're basing a lot of their course on Israel Regardie's work, and find that. There's the Open Source Order of the Golden Dawn, which, as you can guess, is open source. You can join it online. There's the Druidical Order of the Golden Dawn. Again, I became a member of that because I was looking at how some of the ideas of Druidry fitted with the Golden Dawn. And their groups which splintered from the original Golden Dawn. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in America, their temple dates back to 1970s, and you can still look at their work online. I want to step back a moment, though. The reason why these other temples, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Druid Order of the Golden Dawn, and so on, are interesting, for me anyway, is that they attempted to do what I think many esoteric teachings encourage us to do, is to take the basis of the teaching, understand it, and then apply it to specific ideas and circumstances. Certainly with the Druidic Order of the Golden Dawn, if you ever read any of that stuff, it's fascinating, because the Celtic mythology that underpins Druidry has been added to and supplemented by the sort of teachings of what was the Golden Dawn. Let's call them Hermetic teachings, so we don't get too political about this. And the interpretation or the linking together of those two systems, I think, is very interesting. So it's very easy to dismiss these hybrid groups out of hand. And I think these hybrid groups are worth looking at, because they give you a different viewpoint of what was going on, and where some of this teaching could be interpreted or used or made to fit a particular context. So what did the Golden Dawn teach? We're coming to the end of this short thing, so we can talk, but What were they teaching? Well, the statement there, they're primarily interested in magical philosophy, traditional ritual practice for the advancement of the individual spirit. Hermeticism is all about the development of the individual and their connection with the universe or the cosmos or whatever. So the initial aim of the Golden Dawn was to provide a society of men and women who could engage honestly with this exploration of themselves. It went awry, I think, because, as in lots of situations, egos got involved. Now, the curriculum was divided into two orders: an outer order, where the levels were introductions to the tarot and geomancy, as outlined in the ciphers, but actually outlined in pre-existing materials and teaching syllabi, I should say. And the important part here is that the key aspects of the outer order was to get thoroughly involved in the symbolic and metaphysical meaning of the classical elements earth, air, fire, and water. Now, when I was running the witchcraft, the course in Wicca, and later the course in Druidry and other bits of courses I've been involved in teaching, the starting point has been an understanding of the symbolic, metaphorical, and metaphysical nature of the classical elements, earth, air, fire, and water. Simply because, in terms of esoteric teachings, those are what we have around us. The inner order would take that basic knowledge and start to practice what we would call magic, astral projection and scrying, summoning of visions, and the inner order members tutored new recruits and could recommend new inductees. One of the key things here is the outer order of the Golden Dawn were not allowed to practice ritual magic. They could study it, they could study its forms, but they weren't allowed to practice it. That's the level involved with the practical level. And the inner order was all about developing practical skills. So in many ways, the teaching structure was the outer order: learn the basics, learn your ABCs, learn your cultural connections, and the second was apply those connections in magic. This is an example of the hierarchical structure of of the Golden Dawn, and it does your head in a bit. But the first order was actually called Neophyte, Zealota, Theocritus, Practicus, and so on. The numbers are really interesting because the numbers of the grades, so Neophyte is 0, 0. Well, those pairs of numbers are the steps from the bottom of the tree of life, Malkuth, and the steps down from the top of the tree of life, which is Keter. So the neophyte who just starts not on the bottom of the tree and not nowhere near the top of the tree. So the Zelator has understood Malkuth and still has 10 spheres to go, and so on. The portal grade, well, that's when people would be examined on their understanding of their introductory material, and they'd be initiated into the second order, which was the Adeptus level. And it's mapped against the Tree of Life, which we'll look at in a moment. And then the third order is Magister Templar, Magus, and Epicinus. That's at the top of the tree. I don't know whether you were a big fan of Dennis Wheatley novels or Hammer horror movies, but in The Devil Rides Out, the Duke de Richelieu, who is the hero, tells everybody that Makata, the baddie, is actually an Epicinus, which is the highest level of magic wand waving being there is. We can't underestimate, by the way, how the Golden Dawn infiltrated the thinking of subsequent esoteric orders and popular culture, because they became this symbol of, well, it's a secret society, they must be doing something wrong. They don't tell us what it is, and we have to work to understand what it is. So therefore, we don't like them. What are they actually hiding? Became the questions. So you would slowly work through this curriculum, and each of these areas would have an understanding of the elements, and then the stories and context in which those elements were applied in terms of alchemy, tarot, geomancy, and all those arts that we now see as separate arts. You know, you get people who read the tarot who may not necessarily, because why should they, understand how it fits to the Kabbalah. Well, why should they? And I would suggest that if you start to apply it by understanding these other links, it becomes a little richer and more interesting. So that's the structure. And as you can see, people who liked structure and order, liked the mechanistic view of the world, would have actually enjoyed this, because they thought they were moving through a curriculum which would lead to cosmic understanding and cosmic union. However, once the structure itself becomes questioned, as in the questioning of the original grades, or questioning of the curriculum, or questioning of the cipher documents, it starts to look shaky and looks overly complicated, and looks like you're trying to be kept away from knowing the inner secrets. And I'll just sidestep here for a moment to say that, you know, most secret societies have some kind of graded structure. Yeah. And in fact, most mystical training has some kind of graded structure, tests between each grade, so you can go up to the top. We see, I think, the graded structure used to detriment in something like Scientology, because they drew a lot from this. And we see it exemplified possibly within Masonic and Rosicrucian orders, where the idea is not to bar you from information, but to encourage you to progress. And there's a big difference between grading to encourage progression and grading to limit and close off secret parts of the society. And I suspect Golden Dawn suffered from that closing off of access. So what you have there, you have a drawing of the Tree of Life, as you may know it, the Kabbalah. And again, look back at the Kabbalah Moot that we did some months ago now. But this is the map of the orders, the first order, second order, and third order. And the reason that the tree became so important, or the Kabbalah became so important, is each of the Sephirah, each of the spheres, have particular meanings and relevancies, both magical, physical, and psychological. And therefore, studying the connections between those spheres, the 22 paths, which again are linked by the tarot, would lead you to a better understanding of your connection to the cosmos, because that's what this diagram is about. It's a connection to the cosmos. When you joined the Golden Dawn as a neophyte, there would be a ceremony to welcome you, very theatrical, thanks to Francis Farr earlier on in the Golden Dawn, and you would slowly work up these spheres of the Tree of Life. You'd understand the paths, and you'd understand the nature of the paths. You'd understand the tarot card symbolism that goes with the path. You'd understand the meaning of the tarot card in relation to this tree. And everything was designed in the first order to tune into what we could call corresponding universal principles. which I find very interesting. I kind of like that idea. By the time you get to the second order, of course, you're in this really complicated 5-sphere area with this thing called Tiferet at the middle. And in many ways, you're crossing this very simple triangle at the bottom, and that will show you on the screen at the bottom there, with this more complicated interplay of energies or materials in the second order. A reminder, in case you didn't see the Kabbalah talk, creation was said to happen when the unknowable above the top sphere of Keter became manifest through, and the metaphor was a lightning strike, which started at the top here and moved all the way down the tree through the spheres in a particular order to the bottom one, which is Malkuth. So cosmic wholesomeness and God, however you perceive him to be, would connect to the bottom and be filtered out. So the purity, the divine nature of us would be filtered out, and by the time we got to the earthly realm at the bottom. And part of the teachings of Kabbalah was that Kabbalah particularly, but also the Golden Dawn, is that by understanding the path to of our fall from divinity to humanity, we could actually become one with the universe again. Yeah. At the end of the study of the first 4 elements in the first order, you will have taken part in a ritual where you would have been introduced to the combining element, which is spirit. And that ritual is known as crossing the portal or opening the portal. And it was a transition between crossing the veil. Again, you might need to look back at the Kabbalah talk to see how there are 3 veils within the tree. And this was crossing the veil. It was an elevation of you moving beyond the mundane nature of the elements. The inner order was then really involved with an understanding of, well, actually, the Christian Rosenkranz's legends, the material that was written within the Rosicrucian tradition, which kind of lends to my suspicion that the 3 guys just borrowed what they wanted from pre-existing rituals rather than finding the cipher. So Tiferet is this goal, this middle pillar that represents the balance point between understanding the nature of nature and then understanding of your nature of within the cosmos. Interestingly, you may notice on this diagram here a picture which is the Monad hieroglyph, which is John Dee's mystical teachings. John Dee's work and Enochian magic in particular was incorporated into the Golden Dawn, which for me further evidences the fact that these guys created a system from what they knew rather than having this system given to them by a sort of a foreign lady of questionable means. And then the higher grades were the secret masters of the third order. It is arguable as to whether these masters were actually higher members of the Golden Dawn, or whether they were sort of universal masters, as in the Theosophy. That was never made clear to the likes of people below that level. But in many ways, there are limits to what the Golden Dawn taught was accessible to while we're alive. Okay. And as soon as we go to a certain level, usually on the border between the sort of second and third order, there is a space on the tree of life known as the abyss. And crossing the abyss has sometimes been interpreted as the crossing of life into death and beyond. But again, that's a bigger study, and you might be interested to look that back up and go with it. Yeah. So just to bring up two images that are quite important here. There's this image here, which we know as the pentagram. And again, there is a Moot very early on, which talks about the alchemical symbolism of the planets and the 5, 4, 5, 6 pointed star. But we know that each of the points of the pentagram are identified with earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. And so the very beginning of your journey, your mystical journey, in almost every mystical order, is an understanding of earth, air, fire, water, not only as elements, but also as qualities, also as energies, also as symbols. And the way that we integrate those elements, those universal elements, is through understanding spirit or quintessence, which brings them all together. Which is why the 5-pointed star this way up is often seen as a really powerful star, because it's understanding spirit over matter. There we go. When the pentagram is upside down, that's placing matter over spirit. And occult novelists decided that that would be the sign of evil and this is a sign of good. In fact, that's nonsense as well, because if we understand the way that spirit relates to matter, and in some ways is above matter, then we can also understand why matter is over spirit. I'll let you ponder on that one, but it's kind of a very important concept. And lastly, the tree of life, which we've seen in the Kabbalah, just a reminder of it. There are the 10 spheres, the 22 paths, the dark sphere in the middle, which is not named, called dark. And each of those paths links to a tarot card. And those tarot cards and the qualities of those tarot cards actually gives you an indication of what's happening on your journey up the tree or down the tree, depending on which way you're going. And to remind you that the 10 spheres from top to bottom are number cards 1 through to 10. So these are the major trumps, the 22 trumps. When you look at the Waite Smith deck, published by Ryder, the symbolism within it is quite clear, and makes some of the story and the metaphor and the allegory really interesting. Other tarot decks tend not to follow a system like this. The Crowley deck, the Crowley Frieda Harris deck, does, but in a more abstract way. But the Waite Smith deck and the Frieda Harris Crowley deck are designed and built within the Golden Dawn teachings and system and the earlier teachings of the Kabbalah. So those two tarot decks are really interesting to look at. Things like Robin Hood Tarot and Tarot of the Cats and all that kind of stuff are great cards to look at, but they're not tied to a traditional mystical system as such. Although, having said that, I'm sure somebody can tell me who studies the Tarot of the Cats where they actually fit on this scale. So that's it, an overview of the Golden Dawn. We need to bear in mind that whatever we feel about it, it was a preeminent mystical occult society in the early 1900s. It influenced so many other things, particularly writings, poetry. Remember, W.B. Yeats was a member, and some of his poetical writings are influenced by these esoteric teachings. Aleister Crowley was a member, and a lot of his writings were influenced by the things the Golden Dawn taught, but he gave a different spin to them. Modern Wicca has a connection to the teachings of the Golden Dawn, as do many, many other occult associations. We can't underestimate the amount of influence these societies had on modern magical thinking. Golden Dawn, Rosicrucianisms, to some extent Freemasonry, and their spin-offs was very influential in trying to consolidate magical occult thinking and bring them together. And that's the last thing I'll say, actually, before we hand it back over to you guys to have a chat. Magic isn't just about waving wands or leaping around in fancy costumes at certain times of year. Magic is an internal art, an intellectual art, as well as an expressive art form. The ultimate aim, summed up nicely by Aleister Crowley, was magic is the art and science of bringing about change in accordance with will. That simple definition gave some people problems because they associated will with willfulness and egotism. And that's not what I understand from that phrase. To have an act of will means that you're doing something with intention and purpose. And I think we've only got to look around the world today to see where people's intentions and purposes are actually misaligned. And certainly, I find that some of their actions are misaligned from the idea of a holistic, connected universe. Or maybe they're not, because without chaos, you can't have order. Without order, you can't have chaos. So these societies engage the intellect, the emotions, the rational thinking people, and also people who were fascinated by the spiritual connections between everything. And at that point, I'm going to stop the recording and come back to you guys. Yeah.